How we're going to review The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, directed by Peter Jackson, a film that follows Thorin, his dwarf companions, and Bilbo Baggins after taking back the dwarf city Erebor from the dragon Smaug. However, with Smaug's defeat, a much bigger battle arises as a project of greed and power. As an introduction to this review, I briefly want to express my great love for the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, I've said in a couple occasions how much I love those films. I think they are among the greatest epics in cinema history, and I really do. I think they're up there with something like Lawrence of Arabia. To me, the Lord of the Rings trilogy was directed by a once masterclass filmmaker, and I do not use that word lightly. And notice how I also said once, indicating that, of course, he no longer is that masterclass filmmaker. Now, I did do a review of Peter Jackson's King Kong during the summer back when I saw it for the first time in full, and I absolutely love the film. Now, it does indeed have its problems, but I think it's a film that is just a very fun, very entertaining film on just this gigantic epic scale that does make you feel as if you're actually on a journey with its characters, and that I absolutely adore. Do I think it's as good as the Lord of the Rings trilogy? No, I do not, but I still think it's a very, very good film. Where Peter Jackson started to show his bad side was with something like The Lovely Bones, and then of course there's the Hobbit films. For what it's worth, although it's riddled with problems, and I think it massively pales in comparison to some of other Jackson's work, I actually do enjoy the first Hobbit film for what it is. I think it's an enjoyable film. But something like The Desolation of Smaug, on the other hand, I think it is a complete bore fest. I actually just watched The Desolation of Smaug not too long ago for the second time, and like the first time, I almost fell asleep because it's just so incredibly boring. Nothing happens in the film except for the Smaug scene, and I think even that kind of starts to kind of stretch beyond its own limit, and by the time you get to it, you're already asleep. And in The Desolation of Smaug, there are plot lines that are not even in the book, and to be honest, in the film, they serve absolutely no purpose whatsoever. You have the whole thing with Gandalf, which is okay, but, I mean, ultimately, they could have taken that out. You have Legolas who shows up just to say, hey, I was in Lord of the Rings, so now I'm in The Hobbit, so it's cool, but it's really not. But what is by far the worst one is the god-awful romance between the dwarf and Kate from Lost, which is just so freaking bad. It's like nails on a chalkboard. It just makes me cringe. And I find it astounding how any writer could have actually looked at that and said that that was okay to mix with Tolkien's material. I just think it's kind of offensive, to be honest with you. But as for the third and final chapter to a series that should have never been a series to begin with, what is my opinion on the Battle of the Five Armies? Well, it suffers from all the problems that the other ones have. For starters, I'm going to very briefly talk about this one because I have mentioned it before in the past, and I just kind of find it redundant to keep on going on about how I feel about this, but the CGI, I do believe, is way too excessive. Unlike the Lord of the Rings films where Peter Jackson would actually try to shoot on location as much as possible, here he's just like, hey, let's just go straight to a green screen and call it done. And to me, I find that very unambitious, and not only that, but I just feel very detached from the film when I watch a film that has flesh and blood mixed with computer-generated graphics, at least to the excess amount that it is in the Hobbit films. Now, of course, there are some exceptions to that rule, one of which would be something like Gravity, which is riddled with digitized effects, but at the same time, though, I think the effects are actually good, so there's that. And two, it's pretty much impossible to do a film like Gravity without relying on some sort of digital effects, which I think the film utilizes very well. And of course, there are some films out there that are not the most visually impressive, and some of which actually look kind of bad, but sometimes you choose to buy into them because you might be invested into the story, you might be invested into the characters, and that works. But something like The Hobbit has never entirely worked for me. However, with that said, I did find the CGI to be not as bothersome as it has been in the past, and that might have been because I became used to it, or it might have been because I was more accepting to the CGI because of the fact that a lot of the stuff that is done in this film, because it is a gigantic battle film, really could not be done in reality, or at least to the extent that it is done in the film. And another problem that I have with this film, as well as the previous film, is that these films are called The Hobbit, yet The Hobbit is hardly in these films. These films really should have been called just by their subtitles. Take out The Hobbit because, let's face it, these are Thorin's films, which I have a problem with in itself because I've never been a fan of Thorin. I think he's a gigantic jerk. He's self-entitled. He's somebody who is just everything I pretty much hate in a person. However, he does have character development, and by the end of the series, he does end up being a better person versus what he was at the very beginning of the series. But ultimately, I find him, as an audience member, a character very hard to follow, and I say that because he's very wishy-washy. For the first film, I understand why he didn't have any respect for Bilbo. That's to be expected because he had just met him. But by the end of the film, it seemed as if he kind of started to respect him a little bit because he came back. But then there's the second film where, you know, he saved their asses plenty of times, but yet still doesn't give him any respect. It's like he just kind of takes that away. He's like, well, screw him. And then there's this film where there's a little bit of that, but it's kind of explained, which I can kind of get on board with. But overall, I've never been a fan of the character. But going back to Bilbo Baggins, I was on Rolling Stone reading Peter Travers' review, and then I scrolled onto the comments, and I read this comment by this user who basically stated one of the reasons why this person loved the Hobbit film so much, or the book so much, was because the book is about this very small being, you know, despite his size, is able to experience this gigantic journey and is the star of this journey. But unfortunately, you know, the films aren't like that at all. There is a long stretch of film, and the same can be said for The Desolation of Smaug, where Bilbo Baggins, if anything, is just in the background of the film. Most times, he's just not even there. This film is basically a gigantic climax. That's what it is. So you're sitting there for it's probably over an hour of just pure non-stop action, which is cool for a while, but there comes a point where you kind of become a little immune to it. This film, or better yet, Peter Jackson, does not know when to say enough is enough. Whether that be action or whether that be some plot line, like from The Desolation of Smaug, he stretches things out far beyond their own capacity. He needs to find some kind of editor, or needs to find somebody who says, look, what you're doing is a bad idea. He needs to stop surrounding himself with a bunch of yes men if he wants to get back to being that great filmmaker that he once was, which I do believe he can still be if he just tries. However, I do think what we have here does have some legitimate potential. And what I mean is, I would love to see a fan edit. Somebody who's taken all three films and has made just one 3.5 hour film. Take out all the bullshit and just let all the stuff that's relevant remain. Now, I know it seems like I've been trashing this film, which I guess I kind of have been, but I do like this film. And one of the things that I like about this film is that I like the parallel with Bilbo Baggins and Thorin. You know, Bilbo in the ring and Thorin with his obsession with gold and the Arkenstone, I believe that's what it's called in the film. I do like that because it's, you know, it symbolizes addiction. But the real reason why I enjoy this film is because I just kind of perceived it as sort of throwaway entertainment. It's nothing really of true artistry, just something just to kind of watch and be entertained by. And I think that if that's what you're looking for, you're going to get what you came for. I was entertained with this film, whether it be just making fun of it in my head or watching the sheer spectacle, although it does wear a bit thin. It did last me for a good while before I started to get bored. And not only that, but I was interested in seeing how, you know, the series was going to end, which it ends perhaps not in the most satisfying way, but it's not bad. Overall, to give you any sort of context if the ratings actually matter, I would give the first Hobbit a very strong 3.5 out of 5. The second one would get a 2.5 out of 5. And the third one, The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, is a 3 out of 5. As always, I'm Colyn Kirkland, and thank you so much for watching.